through this extremely well. They had a lot to put up with, to start with their husbands going away to the bush. But since then, they've acclimatized themselves and they've joined in the war in their own ways. A lot of them go out to the canteens, and those that are at home with their children, they bake a lot for the troops. Those that older people, they do a lot of knitting for the troops. They help in many, many, many different ways. They work in the radio rooms, they work in the police reserve, air wing reserves. Many, many different ways which they've never thought of doing before.
Yet another aspect of the Rhodesian conflict is the growth of services dealing with direct effects of terrorism. Kay Smith is an insurance assessor who travels around the country evaluating war damage to farms, homesteads and stores.
I generally fly to the assessments because I find it's quicker and I can get more work done, which benefits both me and, of course, the people who've sustained a loss. Flying, of course, is hazardous in this country at the moment, and generally one has to take special precautions. I, for example, tend to fly low over certain areas to avoid being shot at, and of course I am always armed in the event that if I am shot at, I'm at least able to defend myself, look after myself. But when it comes to flying to a particularly dangerous area, I approach the police beforehand and ask if they could possibly arrange an escort for me, and also have the field cleared, because there have been landmines on the strips in the past. They provide an armed escort, they take you over dirt roads to wherever you want to go, and I don't know that I'd be able to do my job at all without their assistance. My work is very varied, because terrorists don't stop at anything, and generally the work involves looking over burnt-out buildings, kraals, burnt-out vehicles, crop losses, and of course livestock thefts.
Physical damage to farms and homes is one aspect of the war's devastation. Of deeper significance to many are the divisive emotional effects of war and the often permanent damage to human relationships. Brutality, atrocities and loss breed an inevitable scarring of the psyche.
My boyfriend's been with his company since the end of '75. He worked for 6 months. He then volunteered to do his national service, which was then 18 months. After he finished his national service, he had to do his normal call-ups, which was 42 days in the bush, 3 weeks out. He's been doing that ever since. So in actual fact, he's been with his firm 3.5 years, but he's only actually worked a year.
I think the relationships between young men and women become more difficult in a war situation. One often hears girls complain that their men have been away fighting with their mates in the bush. When they come home on leave, all they want to do is to drink with their mates for the first couple of days. I think it's important to explain to girls during counselling that this is a perfectly normal winding down phase, that a chap who's been in the bush and under constant threat of death for some weeks reaches a very high pitch of awareness and alertness, and he does need a day or two to sort of wind down to a normal civilian level, and often they find a group effect and drinking is helpful in this particular state. It's not that they don't care for the girl, it's just that they do need this period to unwind to a normal level again.
He's very edgy and very nervous. It takes about a week and a half for him to settle down. He's not even used to sleeping in a bed. And any loud bang, he starts shaking. But he eventually calms down. When he calms down, he's off to the bush again.
Another thing I think a girl has to try to understand is that, again, faced with a threat of death, recurrently young men begin to adopt rather different attitudes, and they feel that they must do as much living as they can, as quickly as they can. And for this reason, they often press their girlfriends into a premature sexual relationship. And the cherishing and caring aspects of the relationship tend to become undervalued. They're not so considerate of the girl's feelings. They feel, as if you like, that they are owed a good time while they can. for the same reason, because of the recurrent uncertainty of our situation, young men seem to be reluctant to commit themselves to a permanent relationship. They seem afraid to become that deeply emotionally involved. And one finds, I think, larger numbers of temporary relationships, living together or living together in all but name, seem to be more common, I think, for this reason.
I think a lot of the girls and the guys have changed. The girls tend to go out by themselves more. They go in a big crowd. They try and meet guys, and they seem to tend to stick together by themselves. As soon as they come back from the bush, they go and get drunk. They stay with their mates, and the girls have got to try and meet them.
I think maybe the girls, too, feel that they're not particularly anxious to commit themselves to a soldier who may not come back and start raising a family. I think there's, again, a reluctance on the part of the girls as well, but more so on the part of the men, I think.
Well, all the children in this day centre have been born since the war. They're anything from 4 years of age up to 5 years. We find the mothers are young. They were even schoolgirls and schoolboys when war broke out here. When we opened this centre 9 years ago, we had very few applications from single girls. Today we'll get 2, 3, sometimes even 4 in 1 week. Mothers tend to be very young, and the tendency seems to be that they want to keep their children, often quite unrealistically. The effects of war on the children themselves, it's a little difficult to assess because these children have grown up with war. To them, it's a way of life. They're used to seeing fathers, uncles, boyfriends in khaki and coming and going. I think they'd be a little surprised to have a father who was at home all the time. But it has affected, for instance, the sort of games they play. Now, our nursery school teacher will say that the children in woodwork, for example, can make very realistic FNs because most of them have seen plenty. They'll also make aeroplanes. Their minds are really attuned to war. When they play games, they don't play cops and robbers as other children used to do. They play soldiers and terrors. And will run around pursuing each other, making noises of machine guns.
Yes. Carry on. What else are you going to say about the dragonfly?
Going to say that when I've turned into...
Well, Craig is 9, and his teacher was telling me that his handwriting has deteriorated badly. His schoolwork is getting very bad, and that he was lazy, and she wanted to know if it was a medical problem. So I took him to my doctor because I thought he might have a coordination problem. And my doctor tested him. We were there for about an hour. He tested him for every conceivable thing. Coordination, eyesight, everything. And there's nothing physically wrong with Craig. Then we asked him what could be the problem, and if it was with my husband going into the bush. And he said this was quite possible, that it's manifesting itself in that Craig has lost interest in his schoolwork, and he can't be bothered anymore. And I found that when my husband goes into the bush, Craig will wet his bed 2, 3 times in the 3 weeks he's away. When he's back, I have no problems with bedwetting.
Older children have special troubles, I think, because they know the situation that their parents can be, for instance, on the farms. I'm thinking particularly of the children who are in boarding schools in town, but who have been on farms that have been attacked and can realize only too well what may be happening with their parents. These children suffer what I think you might call waking dreams. They're distinct from nightmares which are fantasy. Their dreams could be real. And these children, I think, are under most terrible strain.
I believe, or rather I'm strongly convinced that the 2 people who have borne the brunt of this war, most of the brunt of the war, are the rural African women and children. They've been victims of many negative things from both sides of the war. I'll start with the children, for instance. I believe they will grow up with a big sense of fear and hatred. Fear of some of the horrible things they have seen performed in their own eyes. And this may include the death of a parent in the most atrocious way, or the constant fear and startlement of guns and bombs going off. most of the villages are composed of women. And again, they suffer the negative effects from both sides. They do all the hard work of cooking for the boys and running errands, and they have to face the harassment of the security forces. Why did you cook for them? What do you do when somebody is pointing a gun at you? You don't cook for them.
It hasn't affected me that much at all. The only way it has affected me is that, in the sense that I cannot go out to the tribal trust land to see my grandmother, and I can't move freely because of the curfew areas. Well, I hope they can get rid of them so anybody can move around whatever time of the day.
My personal experience came with the death of my father-in-law. There was a group of boys operating within his home area, and on this particular day, they were at his homestead when the spotter aeroplane appeared. And all villagers now, when you see the spotter aeroplane, trouble is ensuing. They run away or do what the best they can. My mother-in-law tried to persuade the boys to leave, her place, but they wouldn't move. So she left to go and fetch some water. My father-in-law had been herding cattle and had just brought them to the cattle kraal. He had just finished locking them up, as it were, when he turned to go home, and he was shot point blank by two black security officers. When a third one asked them why they had done this, one of them just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, I had been grabbed by the spirit of killing.
Not all tribesmen, however, live under this intense pressure. Some live in protected villages built by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They're fenced in, security guarded, and provided with vital amenities such as schools, clinics, and business centres. The district commissioners oversee these protected villages, and these men and their wives live in singular isolation.
Out here we have to take special precautions such as the security wall here to protect our homestead. We have grenade screens up at the window and sandbags up at the walls. We have a bunker at the back of the house, also for rocket attacks, but we're perfectly safe whilst we're in the house and inside the security fence. We do have a problem though when my husband goes out into the bush. He is liable to be attacked, or it is very dangerous for him, and that's very, very worrying for us. We have two children, one at boarding school and one here. We have the problem of travelling over the road into Salisbury to collect her, which is frequently landmined, and there are also ambushes on the road now and again. But once we're back here, then everything's all right. We're perfectly safe.
The other wives, of course, who live in isolation are the farmers' wives. This is a typical mine-protected vehicle, and this is the entrance to a typical Rhodesian farm. But don't be deceived by the apparent placidity of the scene. The farmers who enter this particular farm road are constantly under great hazardous threats from the terrorists, either from landmines, ambushes, or attacks on their very homesteads. And most of the farmers who travel on these particular roads travel in either mine-protected or mine-proofed vehicles in their own protection.
The first thing that I knew about an attack was it was in the evening, about 8:15, and I'd gone out to the kitchen to fetch something that they wanted for the morning, and first thing I knew, a ball of fire, which we eventually discovered was this piece of rocket coming past me, an almighty explosion with it. My first reaction was to fall to the floor.
The first thing I knew was the copy looked like a line of fairy lights, if you can visualise that, and then suddenly I heard the noise and I realised that we were being attacked because I was out in the garden and just seen the girls off, and then I just simply started firing back, and it was carried on from there.
By this time the kitchen was an absolute inferno. You couldn't go anywhere near it. I was